Hello and welcome to episode 4 of the White Shark Interest podcast. Today we have something a little bit different. All our episodes so far have been a roundtable discussion with myself, Ricardo Lacombe, one of the admins of the White Shark Interest group, and other fellow admins and our founder. And we generally talk about shark topics amongst ourselves, as suggested by you guys on the group. The White Shark Interest group is Facebook's largest white shark specific group. And you are welcome to join if you are not already a member. Just head over to Facebook and search the White Shark Interest Group. So instead of a roundtable discussion on your topic points today, I thought we'd do something a little bit different and have our very first guest. And that is the amazing Kathryn Curzon. Now, Kathryn is a shark advocate, a writer, an artist. She has toured the world talking and educating people on shark matters. She's worked on shark cage boats, she's studied and got degrees in the field, and is generally an absolutely awesome, inspiring person who I've had the pleasure of meeting personally, and I thought she'd be a fantastic first guest on the show. So welcome, Kathryn, to the podcast.
Good morning.
We met some time ago. I don't know if you actually recall exactly how we met and where it was at the time.
I do. It was in 2014 and it was in the evening in Simonstown in South Africa, and it was at, I think, the Brass Bell pub.
It was the Brass Bell.
We were just going in and we were passing and we literally just got to say, hey, how you doing? And talk about sharks for a couple of minutes. And that was it.
Yeah, because, we'd been filming out on Rob Lawrence's boat out in False Bay.
That's right.
And obviously you had been working on Chris Fallow's boat, on the other boat, as we called it. Every time we were out filming during the day, which, by the way, was for the documentary Great White Shark Legend, which, shameless plug, as always on these episodes, is available on Amazon in the US and UK. So while we were filming that, obviously we were seeing you guys on the other boat, and then we'd see you on the jetty and so on. And then, we got a very brief sort of meeting with a bit of pizza on the table, I believe. But I should backtrack slightly here. You do a lot and have done some absolutely awesome things in the world of sharks, writing and your artwork and working on shark boats and doing something we're going to talk about later with a lot of working with children and educating children about sharks. How would you describe yourself and your role in the world of sharks?
My main role is, I suppose, based on my belief that I think we all have a voice and we can use that for positive change in a variety of ways. So that has always been my guiding force with shark conservation, writing or actively educating people on the boats or diving with sharks. So I think it's difficult to describe me as doing or being one particular thing because it's so varied, to be honest.
Sure.
But I just think that the key to change is just making sure you use your voice positively because it's an amazing world. There's so much that we can do.
Dare I say you do it extremely well, because I think you absolutely just exude positivity when it comes to love of the ocean, love of sharks, and the work you've done. You do. If anybody is listening, by the way, who wants to check out some of Kathryn's work, you can check it out at your website, which I believe is katherinecurzon.com.
Yes, that's right.
At the time then, when we were out filming, myself and my wife Rachel, when we were making that film and being on Rob Lawrence's boat, I never really got to talk to you about how did you actually get to end up working on Chris Fallow's shark boat out in False Bay? How did that come about?
I've loved sharks like many people since I was a kid. I'd always been obsessed with them and never occurred to me I'd end up working with them. But when I was at university doing a master's degree many moons ago, I did a thesis on great white sharks because someone said to me, did you know you can go and see great white sharks in South Africa? And so I went out on one of their first ever years.
Right.
Very, very different then. What an experience.
What kind of years would this have been then?
That was 2002.
That would have been the time that I believe Rob Lawrence and my friend Brandon Kilbride, who worked on sports, referred to as the Wild West days.
Yeah, totally. It was the small boat, no bathroom. It was hilarious. I did a sort of research expedition then as part of an organised group with a guy called Aidan Martin, who sadly passed away a few years later. I loved it, went back and did my thesis on great white shark social behaviours at the time with Neil Hammerschlag. So we both joined at the same time. We started out at the same time as each other. And then I was hooked and I kept going back for holidays. And if you then fast forward to my early 30s, I'd had enough of regular life in the UK. So I didn't know how I was going to make it happen, but I just said, you know what, I have to go and film my childhood dream of working with sharks. And Chris and Monique were very good friends by then. And as soon as they heard I'd left my job, they said, oh, will you come and work on the shark boat? We've wanted to ask you for years, but we're waiting for you to be available.
This is like a dream for some people. We get this all the time on the White Shark Interest Group. How can I get to work with sharks? How can I get involved with sharks? Given that you were working on a boat in one of the very, very few places in the world where you can, or could, unfortunately at the moment, where you can go out and rock up with a boat and see white sharks, and people dream about doing that lifestyle and doing that job.
Yeah, it's incredible.
What was it actually like then to go from that transition between, because this is, I mean, essentially how myself and Rachel got into sort of making that film that we made, the transition from going out there as a tourist to going out there and almost like behind the curtain, seeing the other side of it, the working with sharks as opposed to just essentially like playing with sharks as a tourist. What was that difference like?
Oh, it's so different. I think for me, what I found, and I loved it, but it's hard work. It was sort of 13-hour days at sea, back-to-back trips, as well as having long days at sea. And naturally, just being at sea on a rocking boat is really physically tiring. You're also needing to be at your absolute best from very, very early in the morning. I don't know, at 5 a.m., I think we used to get up into the evening. And you can never let that change. And then you've got all these guests' needs you need to look after. So, especially with what I was doing and taking care of them, if you've got people who are being seasick, you need to manage them. You're also trying to make sure guests can see sharks, educate them about conservation, answer any questions, make sure they're fed and watered. So it's an interesting mix because you're being a host at sea whilst also being a conservationist.
Mm-hmm.
In my case, trying not to be seasick a lot. I soon discovered that life at sea doesn't work for me very well.
I did get a top tip on that because I remember the first day we were out there filming and I was sick within half an hour and I thought, oh no, this is going to be awful. We're out here for like a month filming and I'm just being sick straight away. Alison Skidmore, who was on Rob's boat, who actually said, you need to eat something.
You do.
I really don't want to eat right now. I've just vomited over the side of the boat and it's rocking. And she's like, no, eat something. And I remember stuffing my face with a chocolate brownie and I was right as rain. Everything was fine after that.
She's right. Chocolate is something sugary, so a bit of chocolate is a really, really good cure for seasickness. Another one is lying down. It took a while to convince people, but if you lie down, for some reason it cures it. Once you get back up, you'll be seasick again. But I remember what I used to do. I'd have my huddle at the front of the boat, and you'd have people lying down like pilchards in a row. And when a shark goes past, I'm going to shout shark to you and just quickly leap up. So I remember occasionally I'd have this team of seasick people, and I'd just say shark, and they'd all quickly look, see the shark, and lie back down. So we got good at seasick management.
But what's it like being out there so often, like every day? Do you get bored of looking at great white sharks?
No, I didn't. I love them so much. They're such incredible animals that, to be honest, I was a bit like an excited kid every day. Just getting out there and seeing them each day was really special because you get to know the sharks as well. And you don't get that when you just go for a few days unless someone's telling you about them. Whereas when you're there for 2 years in all, then you get to know their different personalities and watch their different behaviours. And I loved that. I thought that and meeting different guests were my two favourite things about the whole experience.
I always love to see how people can change from going out on a boat. I mean, I was one of them, going out absolutely terrified in the first instance. You know, I'm going out here to see great white sharks and actually within minutes of being out there at sea and actually seeing these amazing creatures doing what they do and not really giving us a care in the world, to be honest. We think they're going to be after us and trying to eat us and, you know, leaping out of the water at us. And it's just all absolute myth and it's nonsense. And it can just change. Seeing people's attitudes change, you know, that fear change is always something why I've always been a huge advocate of cage diving.
Absolutely. It's life-changing. Because you'd have a mixture of people on the boat, people who were really keen and excited because they already love sharks. Then you'd have the people that had heard it was, an adrenaline fix and cool thing to do. And then the people were absolutely terrified of sharks. And I loved watching people's attitudes change. And I've lost count of the number of times people would be ready to get in the cage, looking absolutely terrified and, a bit shaky. And then they're like, why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? This is a really bad idea. And they'd get in, and then within minutes, they'd put their head back up out of the water with the biggest smile on their face. Often they'd get out of the water and say, I had no idea how relaxed and intelligent these sharks are. They're nothing like the media portrays them.
Cage diving in particular comes with its critics, often very outspoken critics. Where do you think that comes from then, to not understand the power of, it's ecotourism, it's a business, people are running these things as a business, but it is so much more than that, like you say. Do you think the critics of cage diving have valid points as to why cage diving is bad and why it should be banned?
I do, actually. I'm very pro cage diving because of my experiences. But like anything, if it's done poorly, then you can cause problems. And I think that's the key and I think where perhaps those perceptions come from are either seeing things like YouTube videos where a shark has hit the bars of a cage, or some sort of poor practice. But if it's done really well, you don't have those problems. So to give you an example, with our boat, it's all about the bait handling in terms of actually protecting the sharks. If you've got a good bait handler, then the sharks will because they'll follow the bait. They're a little bit like a puppy following a string in that sense. That if you pull the bait in the right way, then the shark's going to go past the cage easily and clearly. But if you start trying to wind the shark up and you're pulling the bait accidentally or intentionally over the cage, then that shark is focused on the bait, and quite easily they can then end up bashing their nose, which is where you see those kinds of videos on YouTube.
Even the critics would say right there, because I've had these discussions where I've criticised, certain photographs or videos of those kind of things happening, that people are all on Facebook like, wow, this is amazing. Look at this, look at this 5-meter shark ramming into the cage. And you kind of jump in and try and educate people as to why this is bad, but also why it happened, where you could see like a bait handler like intentionally pulling a bait straight into the cage to get that adrenaline rush for guests. That's how it's poorly done. But every time I've had that discussion, the critics of cage diving straight away jump in and go, well, you shouldn't be using baits at all. That's why. So how do you think, where's your stance on the whole issue of baits and chum, which is often misunderstood?
To come with baits first, if you don't use baits, then certainly with great whites, you're unlikely to actually see any sharks, which I take the point. If you don't want cage diving to be happening, then that's fair enough. But if you're using bait sensibly and you're not actually, as best as you can, you're not feeding the sharks, and they're not conditioned, then I think the benefits that you get from the shark conservation and the ecotourism outweigh that. With chum, I think that's a tricky one and depends how it's used. So certainly on the boat we were on, and the operators in South Africa are really good. We would have very watered down sort of skeletons of fish, really. That would be about the most of it, and have a very small scent trail. And what we would find is that some days the sharks would turn up quite quickly. So you might think, oh, okay, hang on, are they conditioned to the boat? Are we affecting their behaviour? But you'd have other days when you'd still have that scent line out there, and you'd have bait in the water, and you'd have no sharks for 6 hours, and you could see them. You'd seen them hunting at dawn. They're there, but they're not interested. And I remember on one day we got so bored waiting that we put down a bucket just out of interest to see how clear the water was, because it was quite a beautiful day. Put the bucket in. It was actually Nick, my husband, and then as he pulled the bucket up, a shark followed it up. So
wow,
right, the sharks certainly where we were, they weren't conditioned to boat scent trail, must go to the boat. They were very intelligent, curious animals and would come on their terms, absolutely on their terms. And I guess the point I'm trying to make there is that if you're using your attractants sensibly, then I think you can manage your impact on them and their environment quite easily. Because if you had, as an example, if you've got no cage diving in certain areas where you have those sharks, they don't have that value to them, being worth more alive than dead. Shark fishing is a huge pressure, and if you can do something to have an industry that governments recognise as profitable, worth keeping the sharks protected, and does actually help keep them alive and educates people, I think that's more important if you're then managing that business and its operations properly.
100% agree with you on that for sure. The discussion around cage diving as a whole is like a whole show in itself, and something that I'd love to obviously get you back and some others and talk about cage diving in a bit more depth. I've got hours and hours and hours of footage of a tuna head floating in the water next to the boat and sharks just cruising past it all day long. But it's
Yeah.
very easy, I think, for a critic of cage diving to go and find those odd little clips that you will find on YouTube. Oh yeah, here's I mean, I don't know if there was the shark De Rossi that was around, I think, while we were out there,
Mhm.
and De Rossi just used to come out of nowhere and snatch that bait. And you can take that in isolation and go, look at the shark. You're feeding them. You're feeding the sharks. It's just come for the bait. Yet for another 8 hours that day, you had a tuna head floating in the water and no one was paying it attention. The sharks are just cruising past it. Yeah, the whole baiting thing's a tricky argument to win with people, I think.
Yeah, it is. It is. And I do appreciate everyone has different opinions, and I don't think you're ever going to get anyone agreeing on just one thing altogether. But remembering De Rossi is lovely. I'd forgotten. She's incredible.
Super fast. I mean, I've got some again intense footage of like I've literally got the camera in the water and there's nothing, and then this shark just like torpedoes towards the boat, and I can just hear Gary, the fantastic Gary Carston's in the back, just shouting "De Rossi," and then shouting across to you guys on the other boat, "We've got De Rossi over here," and you'd be like, "Yeah, we've got Amber, or here's May, or whoever else the shark was." It was all. I think it was great fun being out there on the boats with your boat and Rob Lawrence's boat, and sadly that's not how it is in False Bay at the moment.
No, no,
Yeah.
it's changed dramatically.
Do you have any thoughts on why that is? I mean, the orcas, port and starboard get mentioned, and I'm not 100% convinced that that would make that number of sharks disappear for that length of time. But have you any thoughts on what might be going on out there?
I think the orcas are a part of the problem, but I think one of the greater concerns in the area is that there are two fishing boats that are targeting other shark species in the area. And I believe they're longline fisheries, and they're taking about a
Yeah.
thousand sharks out per trip. And so they believe that those populations are collapsing, and that's having the impacts then on the great white sharks. And they have actually literally just released a website that has all of the science and a pre-typed tweet that people can send that goes straight to the minister that's actually looking at this. And it's called sharkfreechips.com.
Yeah, it's been doing the rounds quite a lot recently. Again, we'll have that link down in the descriptions if anybody wants to follow that, and obviously then following the trail of the market, for those fish. In some cases, back to Australia, I believe.
That's right, yeah, being sold as flake in Australia. The thinking, from what I understand, is that that's a big part of the problem that's changing the ecology of the area, and then you're seeing those great whites are not there, whether it's because they've moved or they're being fished as well. I don't know. It's heartbreaking, though. It was absolutely incredible. I still remember when we were there in 2002, and in that time, the sharks were huge. It was just so many sharks. I've still got all my data sheets from then, so different. And I can't quite get my head around thinking about all of the different sharks that I know and them not being there anymore. You can hear it in my voice.
It's one of those areas that I do because obviously, I've got two little boys who are just at the age now where we were starting to talk about, I mean, they're absolute nature lovers. My eldest boy, for a time and still now, he's just obsessed with like marine life and squids and octopus and sharks. And as soon as those boys are old enough, we've got to take them out to False Bay. It will blow their minds and it'll change their perceptions for the rest of their lives. And we've kind of been sat saying, well, we can't do that right now. It's tragic, like you say, it is. But I do have hope that if the situation, if the factors could be identified, and I don't believe I don't put it down to these two orcas. I think that's just a very good headline: orcas hunting great whites. It's clickbait. People like to put all that. I just can't buy that is it, because as you will know from observing sharks in False Bay, how cautious they are. And one thing happens, like if there is a death of a shark, and there has been orcas around, or like when the O search boat rocked up and the sharks disappeared, and they're very, very, very cautious creatures, which a lot of people don't understand because they just see the teeth and the Shark Week programs, that these are just like tanks in the sea. I don't buy that two orcas do that for such a length of time. I just can't buy that.
There's more to it, and their personalities are fascinating and For sure, they are very, very cautious. They have such a stress response. If one of them's injured, then they will scatter like marbles for about 6 weeks and just stay away from the area.
It is therefore something that I do have a huge hope that if the situation just change, if the fishing practices change, or those orcas do decide to toddle off somewhere else, or even I thought, this awful sort of pandemic lockdown situation, can that change on a small scale if people are out of that area for long enough? Would that change the picture, and will we see those come back? There were a couple of reports I heard that quite early on during the whole lockdown situation that some sharks had been spotted back out in False Bay, but obviously no one's going out there on a daily basis to corroborate that and to see that. But I do hold hope that they will come back to False Bay. They have to. It's too much of a magical place to not see that again.
Absolutely. And you should always hold hope. I had a friend that said, if there was an award for enthusiasm, you'd get it. This lockdown can change so many things. For a start, everyone has the chance to step back for a minute and say, what can I do to make a difference? There is so much we can do, and if everyone does something, it makes collectively a massive difference. And I think that in itself is a reason to have hope.
I've been fascinated seeing pictures, even local to myself here in England, that suddenly there's deer roaming around the city centre, or there's a badger toddling through the railway station.
No way.
It is. It's fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating to see wildlife kind of creeping back into these places.
Yeah, given a chance to breathe, nature is incredibly resilient. You just have to take the pressure off a little bit to see recovery. And hopefully, people will see things like that and it will impact other areas of their lives where, after lockdown, they question how they go about their days, but also the impact that they're having on the planet, even just within their household.
Indeed, and I do fully appreciate that. Obviously, the lockdown situation is been extremely hard on some people, and I don't want anyone to think that it's not. But yes, if we can find some positivity in it. Can I just switch to okay? So we sat at a table in the Brass Bell and having a pizza, and them seeing you and Jimmy Partington and Gary Carston's there, and it's like all these people working on shark boats who've all gone and done very sort of different things. So you, just to fast forward a bit, the next I kind of saw your name ping around was when you started running Friends for Sharks with your husband Nick.
Yeah.
So can you tell us a little bit about that? Because I think that was a fascinating project. But can you just sort of tell us exactly what that was, and how that came about?
So that came about halfway through my second year in South Africa, working on the boat. And Nick had joined me then for that season. We got, I think, halfway through the season, and I slipped a disc in my back, which meant I couldn't do anything, to be quite frank. I couldn't even stand up, and I was on like traction each day. And it was crazy how this happened. Talk about meant to be. And so I was spending my days lying in bed recovering, going, okay, well, what am I going to do? Because no one's going to employ me because I actually can't stand up, but I need something positive to focus on while I'm recovering. Because I was looking at a 6 months recovery and learning how to, walk and be upright again over time. I went to bed one night, and no word of a lie, I woke up really early and it was all in my head. And I just turned to Nick and I was staring at him, waiting for him to wake up. And he woke up and he was like, what? What's going on? And I said, we're going to travel the world, and we're going to talk to people all about shark conservation. And he just went, okay. I'm not sure that's what he thought, but he's always on board with the ideas. So we decided that we would set up this thing, just the two of us, and we would spend, while I was recovering, we would set it up, and then we would spend a year going around the world to different countries, and we would organise as many free shark conservation talks, workshops and events for adults and children, any ages, and we would teach them all about the importance of sharks in the oceans. And the idea behind it being that often marine biology and those types of experiences are expensive, and so not everybody has access to learn about such cool things, and that we would provide it all for free so that it became accessible, and that we were raising money for charities, shark conservation charities, where we could when we were travelling. It was kind of like, well, there's only one way to make this happen. We ran the idea by a friend, and he said, I will build you a website. You have to do this. That's my sponsorship. And we were like, okay, the only way we're going to do this is if we commit, by which point we didn't really have much money. So the entire savings we had left we bought our flights there and then. I think it was 5 months down the line, and then we sat down very quietly, just going, "Oh, now we have to make this happen because we've got no money left, and that flight's booked."
You do realise there's a little part of that that is actually insane.
It was absolutely
And
crazy.
let's go and use all our savings to book some flights. Now that is commitment.
If I'm going to do it, I do it properly. That's what I always say. I think the next thing was the friend that did the website said, you need to learn about social media. Twitter, what's that? Because at that point, I had no knowledge of anything like this. I hadn't got a background in marketing or comms or anything like that. So we had 5 months and we were in South Africa for the remainder of the season. And I was allowed to be upright for about 15 minutes. So whenever I was allowed upright, I'd do something towards this. I learned about social media a little bit at the time.
In retrospect, now looking back, it certainly didn't come across like you didn't know anything about social media because it came across extremely well from the get-go, to be fair.
Ah, thank you. I think I found my niche. And yeah, and we got some business sponsors that helped us out with things like, for example, Jimmy Partington, what a star. He sponsored us some t-shirts with our logo and some, hoodie jumpers with our logo. So we'd have something that would at least look like we were a cohesive unit when we were doing our talks. Yeah, I sent probably over 1,000 emails we picked different countries we would go to. And then I found lists of everything from schools, higher education, aquariums, social clubs, dive centres, retirement villages, everything. And I just flung out hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of emails saying, this is what we're doing. Can we come and give you a talk? We had plans for the countries because obviously we'd booked our flights because, of course, we didn't have money. So the whole point was that we would spend as little as possible to raise money for charity as well. And also because we didn't have any and no one was funding us. It was self-funded. So we were doing fundraising activities to get what we could, but we were certainly not going to be spending money on staying in places. Bits and bobs like that would come through where people would support us and say, you can come and stay at mine for a night. Certain places like the Cook Islands, we knew then we'd need to pay for our hostel for the 2 weeks we were there giving talks because where else would we stay? We sort of didn't know anyone there that would be able to accommodate us.
Yeah.
So trying to plan all of this was quite frenetic. We were very fortunate actually that early on Projects Abroad heard about what we were doing and they invited us to come later in the tour to Fiji, Cambodia and Thailand. And they said, if you can create a suite of lectures, you can come to each one for a few weeks and give your lectures to all of our visiting volunteers as they come and go. So we would have 10 or 11 different shark lectures on different topics.
So was this about all sharks or just great white sharks?
That was all sharks. And we really varied what we were doing. So depending on what people were interested in, we had a whole range of talks, whether it was a short, half an hour, an hour and a half, and all sorts of audience sizes. So by the time that we actually started, and we were back in England by that point, we had the good sort of bones of what we were doing set up, and we'd fundraised some money. Nick did a freezing swim on New Year's Day in Padstow in Cornwall, and the water was
I
about...
remember seeing that on social media. It was insane. Yeah.
It was very worrying, but very funny.
Mm.
And he was amazing, but he was sick as a dog.
No, I've got to stop you there. So, okay, so you've put your savings into this.
Yeah.
You've decided on this massive life-changing thing. You're going to tour all these countries. I mean, what countries did you end up visiting?
Yeah, we went England and then across to Canada, the Cook Islands, Australia, New Zealand, Fiji, Cambodia, Thailand.
So you've put all your savings into this and you've planned this and you're kind of doing it. And you've got no experience public speaking.
Yeah.
And now he's got a flu.
Yeah.
So there is maybe a bit of a devil's advocate and a bit of a sanity check here that says, you're doing this for what reason? Are you doing this for sharks and shark education?
Yeah, it was that. I was just driven by the need to do something positive for shark conservation. I just couldn't bear the thought of not using my voice for good, really. And that was it. I just was desperate to get out there and do my bit.
Absolutely amazing. I mean, the amount of people who say, what can I do?" And I'm not suggesting everyone should throw their life savings into a world tour, because if you can do that, fantastic. But if you don't have the means, but Matt, what a message, what an inspiration for people to say, what can I do in terms of shark conservation? That is ultimate. Hats off to you. 50 times over. That is fantastic. You and Nick. That's such an achievement to even plan that and start doing that under those conditions. So hats off.
Thank you.
Now, the thing that I remember seeing most, and something that's very dear to myself, was seeing a lot of the pictures of you doing talks in schools with the kids. What's it like, going in and seeing children at such young age and talking to them about, sharks and great white sharks? What kind of reception did you get?
Oh, it was amazing. So precious. What we would find is that we would do talks for like kindergarten upwards, and obviously we'd need to vary our content at that age. And my favourite were around sort of 6 years to 8 years old. They just love everything. They were incredibly enthusiastic. They were just thrilled to be able to learn about sharks and also just talk about sharks and play at being sharks. It was amazing watching their excitement about them, and we would do shark art with them as well while we were there at the different schools. At that age group, they were really engaged and very, very positive about sharks. They loved them. They couldn't get enough of them. I found that really, really special, really inspiring, because at that age, they are very impressionable and they were getting the right impressions that sharks are amazing.
People of kind of our generation, we might have had that interest in sharks, but do you see that there's a difference between how, say, we grew up looking at sharks and how kids these days look at sharks?
I think so. As I know, certainly when we were growing up, you'd find that really when we were young, the only exposure to sharks would be those 1980s shark attack books with all the bloody teeth and things like that. And also, it was not that long after Jaws.
Yeah.
Now, with social connectivity and with global media, there are a lot of people doing good work about sharks. So it's that much easier for children and also parents that are interested in conservation to direct their youngsters towards positive resources, which we didn't have access to growing up.
When we were filming, we did a whole little section in our documentary, which was just talking to kids about great whites, specifically kids in South Africa, because obviously they're on the doorstep of sharks. And I found it just amazing and inspiring how they were talking about every one of them started talking about ecosystems, what the sharks' place in ecosystems was. I just found that the attitude was completely different. I mean, even down to things as silly as it may seem to some, that Baby Shark song that will drive me insane if I ever hear it again. It's doing the rounds on social media, and all the kids are singing Baby Shark and doing like hand movements and stuff. That's kind of a form of education or a form of like exposure to it that, like you said, we just didn't get when we were that age.
It's still positive messaging. It's still putting sharks in people's consciousness so that they're aware of them, and then that might lead on to them going, sharks are cool, and finding out more.
We always say this on these podcasts and in the White Shark Interest Group. Everybody sort of cites Jaws. Oh, Jaws is what got me interested in sharks. Jaws was the first film I ever actually remember seeing. I grew up in Canada, and I remember being in a drive-in theatre somewhere, and it's vague memories of it, but I remember watching Jaws as a little kid. But the only thing I remember from that time, like you say, in books particularly, was always the pictures of Rodney Fox and his sort of injuries. But that's all I remember was those pictures of Rodney Fox showing his shark bites and the scars and things, and that did have a really long-lasting effect, to the point where I didn't even want to go in a river or a swimming pool because the fear was so strong of sharks. And not to obviously put a negative on that, but to see kids now that, like you say, they get that exposure to more positive messages and more education is I think that's probably the most inspiring thing I saw out of the whole work you were doing with that tour, being with kids and teaching kids about sharks. And it's inspiring to see. And again, anyone on the group who's saying, what can I do? Just go and check out Kat and Nick's work on the links that we've provided, and go and have a look at the work they were doing. But I would like to ask you, if you don't mind, I think you pretty much got burnt out doing this.
Yeah, I have to laugh because it cracks me up. We were talking about this yesterday. Yeah, definitely go and do positive things for sharks. Maybe don't do it quite as intensively as I did, because Yeah, we did 87 talks in 8 countries in 10 months.
Wow.
Afterwards, I really burnt out. We actually didn't go back to England. We emigrated straight to New Zealand because we fell in love with the country on our tour. I should have seen the warning signs. I was getting more and more tired and needing to sleep in the day. And anyway, long story short, there came a day once we had our home. I sat down one evening and just said, I'm exhausted. And then I couldn't get out of bed for about 6 months.
Wow.
A thing called adrenal fatigue, which, if anyone knows, very similar to chronic fatigue. It just means your body is quite literally burnt out and can't produce the hormones anymore that keep you awake and functioning.
Yeah.
I couldn't even brush my teeth without having to sit down for a rest halfway through. It was pretty scary, but as with all the bad things, you get the best lessons. And I'm 3 years into my recovery so far, and I've learned so much about wellness. And I've gone from not being able to be awake to I am now working and I can run and do run half marathons. So
I'd like to congratulate you on making me feel very lazy on a weekly basis. Just before I get on to some of the things that obviously you're doing now, can I just ask you about what happened with the whole cage diving situation in New Zealand? Because that actually got banned for a while, didn't it?
It did, yeah. That was quite an interesting situation here. Yeah, so we do have cage diving here, and there were 2 operators. My understanding of it was that there were significant concerns from the power fishing industry, which involves free diving and also fishing boats in general, actually, were finding that they were sort of concerned about the sharks being a risk in terms of the potential for a shark attack occurring in the future. And enough noise was made that then it actually was banned and then changed their mind again. And it became reinstated. And there is, unfortunately, one of the operators then is now not running, but one of them is. So it's a real hot potato here. It's quite controversial.
New Zealand is just not one of those places that you ever hear about in terms of cage diving. I guess it's overshadowed by obviously the big operators out in Australia. But what's the white shark populations like there, or other shark populations?
We have lots of sharks here, actually, in general. Yes, it is very different, and you're right. Not many people know about it. The cage diving here is a relatively small industry, especially now there's the one operator. Discovery Channel, like Jeff Kerr and co from Discovery, they come over relatively regularly for filming.
Yeah.
It's not as lucrative and well known as other countries. Yeah, we get various different species here, and the great whites, you'll find them around both islands of New Zealand. There are, I believe, they think further north in the islands here that there are young great whites around there, which is quite interesting to see them popping up. I hear they are very social, that they are much more accustomed to being close to each other than the great whites in South Africa are quite cautious about maintaining their distance from one another. And the water's beautiful here. The colour is just stunning. It's very sort of bluey green, so it's definitely worth a visit. It's just a little more difficult to get to.
You live there now. That's your home. And I, again, fascinated to see that amazing style of artwork you do, which I think the first thing I saw you do was a whale shark.
So there's a theme here. After the burnout, I say after because, to be honest, it's had some permanent impacts, but I realised that I couldn't do shark talks because I don't have the energy levels to be able to do that. So I was looking for new ways to help. And I've always loved art, but not really done any since I was at school. So I just thought, well, I'll just do shark art because that's kind of nice and steady paced. I can do it from home. But then if anyone wants to buy prints and art, then it's an opportunity for me to educate them about sharks and marine life. And then I also can donate some money to marine conservation causes. So yeah, I started taking that up as part of my recovery. And I do that now. And the piece you're referring to, that whale shark, that took 50 hours. So what I do is I use just one pen and it's literally all dots. So it's just dots upon dots upon dots.
It's a very, very unique style and it does stand out.
That original one is quite a big piece, and I've done a few other ones as well. It's just a way to engage people again with remembering just the magic of nature, and especially the oceans. It's truly incredible. Speaking of my art, I have 3 different types of ocean art prints. I have a whale shark print, an octopus and a jellyfish that make a beautiful set together, and I'd like to offer those at a special price. I normally sell each of those ocean prints for 50 New Zealand dollars each and $150 for the 3, but I'd like to offer them for $120 instead. So if any of your listeners are keen and would like to place an order, please get in touch.
You're definitely an ocean advocate, and it just I love that you do that. You're doing writing as well for, I've seen you do a few articles like scuba magazines and so on.
Yeah, I write for scuba diving and marine conservation and travel outlets around the world. So articles about dive travel, shark conservation, ocean sustainability, anything with an environmental topic I love, but also travel destinations. And I then developed that, and I now actually do marketing and comms work for various people in the travel industry and marine conservation. So writing their website content, making sure it's engaging, social media management. My ultimate dream is to be doing that work for shark conservation or shark tourism businesses. So I keep putting that out there in my head that in the future I would love to use my skills to do that. And I think I found my niche. I know that writing is my I guess my passion, and also something that I'm
given the
reasonably good
breadth of
at.
things you've already done, which, as I say, you've ticked about 3 things that most people I hear who talk about sharks and the world of, marine biology, you're doing things that people absolutely dream of doing. And I'll say it, I think you're an absolute inspiration to people who want to get into those kind of areas of work and stand as an example for particularly women. I would say I think women in the shark world is something that I think more people need to tune into. That we get a lot of men, we get a lot of macho egos around sharks, and it can come along as a bit of a breath of fresh air when we see people like yourself. You've really got a niche sort of body of work there, and if you say you're going to work in that area and that's your dream, I'm absolutely certain that I'm sure we'll be talking again when you actually do it. You've also taken time in there to write a book as well.
Yeah, that's right. I decided that I wanted to write a book that would inspire people if they're feeling sort of bogged down with their lives or have perhaps been through some tragic circumstances, that they would then have something inspiring to read to help them make changes in their life. So I wrote a book called No Damage, and it's under my maiden name, Kathryn Hodgson. And it was all about the circumstances that led me to leave England and take that leap to then go and work as a cage dive guide. And it follows that time in South Africa, and then also on to becoming a scuba diving instructor, because I was terrified of scuba diving to the point that I would actually hyperventilate if I tried to put my face in the water and breathe the regulator.
Why particularly the fear of scuba diving?
It was a feeling that for some reason there was a link in my brain saying that if I would scuba dive, I would die. It was really severe fear for me. It was a real problem. And so it follows my journey of how I overcame that, because I decided that the best way to get over a fear of scuba diving would be to become a scuba diving instructor. My first dives were spent crying into my mask and needing hypnotherapy.
Oh my goodness.
Uplifting read to encourage people never to quit and to follow their dreams. And there's some quite unexpected moments in there, which I will say nothing about what happened, but people will find out when they read it.
Superb. Check that out, guys. If you, again, follow the links below, and please still go and check that out, because, again, even if you're coming from a shark point of view, the work that Kat's done in the shark world and how she made those leaps, that is definitely, surely a good read for you.
The most important thing is finding what you're good at, and everyone has got a natural talent at something. And if you can figure out what it is you're good at and also what you love to do, I think the world's your oyster. You just have to have the knowledge of that, and then just find a way forwards that will just take you step by step towards whatever your dream is. Because everyone has different abilities and different dreams, but collectively they can all make a difference. So never quit. Never quit. Even if you're burnt out, just find a different thing to do.
Kathryn, it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you today. I would love if we can speak to you again at some point and get you back on the podcast. We've got a lot of members out there. There's like 45,000 plus members now, and I know they will absolutely eat up the things you're doing and putting out there. So thank you so much for your time today. I so appreciate it.
It's my pleasure, and I'd love to come back and talk more.
That'd be superb. Well, we're just about out of time now, so I want to thank Kat again just for your time. And if you are not a member of the White Shark Interest Group, or anything you hear today or on the other episodes is of interest for you, please do head over to Facebook and just search the White Shark Interest Group. We are 46,000 members strong community. sharing information, knowledge, education, pictures, videos, all the cool great white shark stuff. You can also find us on Instagram at whiteshark_interest group, and we have a website which is whitesharkinterestgroup.com. So if you are listening to the podcast and you're not a member, as you enter the group and request to join, we always ask a question about why you want to join. If you've come via this podcast, then please do give us a shout out and say, heard the podcast and thought I'd check out the group, and we'll be happy to see you in there sharing the knowledge. So with that said, one more thanks again today to Kat for a fantastic interview. Check out all the links below, and we will see you on the next episode.